Boo Show again. Today I'm going to show you how to replace a bad starter on a 97 Honda Accord. If you're not sure if your starter's bad, check out my no crank diagnosis video. There's a link in the description.
First thing I'm going to do is verify the issue. The vehicle won't crank, so I'm just going to turn it to start, see if I can get it to crank. I'm in start. Nothing's happening. You can actually hear the fuel pump running when I'm in start.
Many things can cause a no crank. You can't just assume the starter is bad. I already went through the diagnosis in another video. I just wanted to show you the vehicle wouldn't crank.
To get a little more elbow room to get to the starter, I'm going to remove the air intake tube. Before I do that, I'm just going to pop off the cruise cable, which rests on top of it. Then just bring it back, tuck it back here. Pull out the air intake tube. 4 Phillips head screws. Not a bad time to check out your air filter.
Pop out the positive battery cable.
Transmission throttle valve cable. Map sensor connector. Vacuum line. Map sensor harness that pops into the top of the hose. Take that out of the way. Fresh air side of the PCV system. Be able to just grab it, pull it out. Sometimes you may need to squeeze that clamp. And that's it for the non-VTEC engines. VTEC engines will have an additional resonator and a hose in this area.
Check my VTEC solenoid gasket video to see the removal of a VTEC intake tube.
Move 1 Phillips screw to loosen the clamp holding the hose to the throttle body. Get that good and loose. Then pull the hose out of the throttle body and remove the entire assembly. Here's our starter. There's a bracket over here. This is the throttle valve cable that we unclip from the airbox. It's held onto that bracket by 2 clips. Remove it from those 2 clips. They are plastic, so be careful when removing them. And you'll see there's the 1 bolt. You want to remove that bolt that holds the bracket to the body of the starter and holds this clamp that holds the lower radiator hose on. That's 1 10mm bolt. And you'll see that the C-clamp holding the radiator hose on will come free as well. I'm just going to swing that up. And that's out of the way. I'm just going to leave it there. I'll just swing it back down later. Now you can see the rear end of the starter motor. And this is about as much space as we're going to get, so you better get used to working in tight quarters. Remove the negative battery terminal before you touch any of the connectors on the starter. If you were to take the positive terminal off the starter and touch it to any metal portion of the vehicle, it'll spark. This is also a good time to tell you, if you do have a Honda with a radio code, make sure you get it, because once you disconnect power from the battery, your factory radio will not work without that code. So if you have a flashing anti-theft light on your radio, You should better have that code before you disconnect the battery. You only need to disconnect the negative terminal. You can leave the positive terminal alone. After you remove it, be sure to tuck it down somewhere where it will not make contact with the battery terminal. Just tuck it down there. Now the electrical system is safe to work on, and we can remove the positive battery terminal from the starter solenoid.
Remove the solenoid trigger wire.
Unfortunately, I can't get you a better view than this. It's pretty tight down here. So I'm going to pull back on this boot, and you see under there's a fastener. That's a 12mm fastener. Break it loose. Remember, at this point, the battery has been disconnected. Should be able to get it off by hand the rest of the way. Fortunately, it's just a battle of holding this boot back and getting your socket on there. It's very tight quarters, but there's just enough room to do what you have to do. There we go. Yeah. Try not to drop that. Okay, now I'm just going to pull the wire off and try to tuck that up and out of the way. Right there's fine.
If you want a little more clearance to get at the power wire, you can remove the battery. I was able to easily work around it, so I didn't remove it. You have two 14mm bolts holding the starter on, and here are their locations.
There's the back of the starter. You can barely see just the side of that fastener. And right under the transmission cooler line, that's that tube right there, you could see the second fastener. And just as a point of reference, there my socket is on that bolt on the left hand side. You got to get the right size extension on there, otherwise your socket will hit that stud on the motor mount. Then basically from there, just grab the end of your extension and thread the rest of the bolt out by hand. There's one. Here I am on that other fastener. Maybe a little bit easier to see with my socket on it. A little bit more reflective. There it is. And over here on an angle is my ratchet. There's just enough room, just as before. I'm using the same length extension. I'm just going to use the socket to thread the fastener out the rest of the way. I'm lifting the starter up to prevent the fastener from binding. And there, that fastener goes. There we go. Be sure to note that there's a longer fastener and a shorter fastener. The shorter fastener goes on the right, longer fastener goes on the left. I'm gonna move it out to the left in this hole here so I can get it out of here. It's pretty tight, but you'll be able to get it out. Gently lift up the AC lines if they get in your way. Don't bend them. Continue pivoting the starter out to the left. And you can bring it out this way. You'll also need to remove one bolt holding this harness on here to gain enough clearance. 110mm fastener. Flip that out to the side. And now you can move this back a little bit to get the starter out. There it goes. Then you can pull it up through this area here. A quick reminder in case you forget which bolt goes where. When the starter is mounted in the vehicle, the solenoid's facing to your right. And if you look at the two mounting gears, you notice one is thinner, and this one, where the other bolt goes, is thicker. The longer bolt goes through the thicker mounting gear, the shorter bolt goes through the thinner one. So long on the left, short on the right. I'm gonna remove the terminal nut, make it easier for me later. Also pull off the lock washer. Now if you remember how we removed the starter, we removed it pinion gear up, and that's how we're going to put it back down. Rotate it however we have to get it back down there. This harness will be in the way, so you're just going to have to push it off to the side. There it goes. Now we're going to rotate it so that the solenoid is facing the right while we're in this little area here. And there it is. Shorter bolt goes on the right hand side here. Put it on your socket with the extension. Thread it in by hand. Never start it with a ratchet. You don't want to cross thread it. These bolts go into aluminum on the transmission. You don't want to damage those threads. Now you could just shift the starter around until the threads line up. There we are. That's enough for now. I want a little bit of movement in the starter to get the other bolt threads lined up. I got it started on an angle like that. Felt for it with my finger, and I was able to push it in the hole. Just keep rotating your socket until the threads catch. Just gonna put my finger back there. Yep, I caught the threads, and we're going in. And that's the reason why I left the other fastener just a little bit loose. So I was able to move the starter up and down and get the holes to line up. If you tighten one fastener down all the way, then you may not be able to get the threads started in the other hole. Now I can just pop my ratchet on there. Just get it good and snug, but don't overdo it. That's enough. Now we have to reattach the positive terminal to the solenoid. And it's just going to be a battle of keeping this boot off the terminal while you try installing the lock washer and the nut. This is honestly where it may be easier to remove the battery to give yourself a bit of extra free space. But usually, if I could work around it, I won't remove the part. It's not too much extra trouble. Sorry about that. I had to get an extra hand in here to put this nut on, and there was no other way to do it without getting the camera out of the way to get my other arm in there. Now, don't over tighten this. This does go into the plastic solenoid housing. Over tighten it, you'll break the terminal off. There we go. The original nut on here was a 12 millimeter, but the replacement is a 13. So be aware of that. Sometimes they change the fastener sizes up on you on these posts here. And just till it's nice and snug, that's enough. Over tighten, go break in this solenoid terminal, and you're going to be pulling out this starter again. Just cover up the terminal. There you are. And reconnect the starter solenoid trigger wire. Once you line up the spade connected, then just push it in with your finger. Wiggle and push. You'll feel it when it pops in. Slide the harness clamp back in place. Install the 10 millimeter fastener. Now you can reinstall this bracket that holds the transmission throttle cable to the starter body. First, put this clamp back down over the bracket on the starter. Then put the bracket on top of that. Then you can pop the throttle valve cable back into the plastic clips. Now we can pop the intake tube back on. Reinstall the intake tube to the throttle body. You'll notice there are two tooth pieces. One here, one here. When they line up between this piece here, you know you've got the alignment right. Tighten up the clamp. Grab the map sensor connector, route it under this vacuum line. Pop it in.
And pop it onto its clip on the intake tube.
And pop the vacuum line on its clip up top. Reinstall the fresh air hose for the PCV system. Clip the positive battery wire back in. Then tighten up all the screws on the airbox. Then reinstall the intake snorkel. Put it into the tube down there and push it down until it clicks. Reinstall the transmission throttle cable. Make sure this crimped piece is above the clip. Then reinstall the cruise control cable onto its clips.
You want the nut to be on the left-hand side of this clip.
Just pop it in the other one. Now you can reconnect the negative battery terminal. Now only tighten these terminals up to the point where you cannot rotate it by hand. That's far enough. Over tightening will only serve to stretch this out, stretch the connector out to the point where eventually if these two halves come together, you won't even be able to tighten up the terminal anymore. And that's a fix.